What About Vietnam? A podcast with Kerry Newsome. The series where Kerry talks with travellers about their experiences and adventures. Find out more about Vietnam from the people who have actually been there.
What about Vietnam?
Whether it's adventure, exploring the culture and cuisine, shopping, or just soaking up the sun. Let Kerry and her travellers pave the way for a magical holiday in Vietnam.
What about Vietnam?
Xin chào and welcome to the What About Vietnam podcast. Today we have a bonus edition. I'm calling it a bonus because I get to sit on the other side of the microphone with Conor Kelly. This is a wonderfully executed interview by Conor Kelly, as he is the host of his own podcast called The Comeback. And it's a great podcast where he talks to all kinds of people associated with Vietnam. And I think he's done like nearly, 300 or something interviews. So he's really in their boots and all in podcasting in Vietnam. But in the interview with me, he took the opportunity to ask some probing questions about my personal background to Vietnam. We discussed some of the things that I think will impact on tourism in the coming months towards the end of 22 and how I see things shaping up into 23. I'm very, very appreciative of this opportunity. I think it's going to give you some insights into just how I'm tracking Vietnam and how I see it, really coming back into vogue for travellers in the future. My thanks to Conor again, and it was really great to sit on the other side of the microphone just for this once. Please enjoy, stay tuned, and we'll bring you the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Comeback podcast. As usual, I am your host Conor, and today I am delighted to welcome What About Vietnam's Kerry Newsome, currently based in Australia, where we are going to talk about life in Vietnam, what about Vietnam, and more of what Vietnam has to offer going forward. I'm looking forward to this one. How are you, Kerry? Welcome.
Thanks very much, Conor. I'm really looking forward to the show, especially being on this side of the fence rather than on the other as per normal.
Yeah, it's quite weird, isn't it, when you get interviewed and you think, oh, I'm not directing the conversation here. It almost feels slightly odd. I'm still adjusting to it myself when I go on the other side.
Give me a score at the end and let me know how I go.
I'm sure it'll be great. You get a 9 so far. What is your relationship with Vietnam, Kerry? Just to get a brief overview, when did you first come to Vietnam?
Okay, so I came in 2007 and I was part of one of the very early kind of travelers to Vietnam. In fact, my family and friends said, gosh, you're going to Vietnam like I was going to some war zone still, So I was a real pioneer. But there was a lady called Maeve O'Mara, and she was running tours to Vietnam, food tours in particular, because she ran a show called Food Safaris. You might have seen it or heard of it. And so I went with that, and that was just your typical top to bottom, start in Hanoi, finish in Ho Chi Minh kind of story. But I just fell in love with it. It just got to me.
Yeah, I see. And I love the fact you've mentioned that back in, say, 2007, there would be the connotation of Vietnam as this completely random location or a war zone, because I feel like back then, and you can obviously clarify, it's absolutely nothing like this vibrant cosmopolitan place, especially Saigon, that we see currently.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I can give you an example. In the city of Hoi An, there is the Chu Bon River that runs through the main town. Well, the other side of the river, there was just shanties. There was no restaurants. There was no night markets. There was no hotels. There was nothing. There was just I felt like, why do they have a bridge? Because it actually goes nowhere and there's nothing there. Of course, that's changed dramatically as there is a whole new life over the other side of the bridge. And it's just a totally different old town now.
Yeah, and I've almost got two questions in one. The first one I'll ask, and then I'll move to the second. The first being, what exactly was it about Vietnam that made you fall in love with it?
Look, a couple of things happened for me during that first trip. I met an Australian expat, and she was starting up or in the very early stages of a charity or an NGO in Vietnam, uh, looking to assist or sponsor young girls in their education in Vietnam. And her name is Linda Byrne, and the foundation is called the In Children's Education Foundation. And I just gelled with her. And because she was Australian, there was just so much she could sort of relate to me so that I could kind of better understand and see it and see Vietnam through her eyes. So she was kind of pointing things out to me that just helped with a little bit of relativity. So, meeting expats over there was kind of one thing. And then just the Vietnamese themselves. I met another girl that I've also stayed friends with since that time. And just over that time, I've just grown further in love. So it was probably the people. And, up until then, I'd done a fair bit of travel through Asia, Thailand, the Philippines, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. And I just never got the same vibe and feeling of welcome and warmth and caring that I did in Vietnam. So I thought, no, this is more me. I feel safer, and I was certainly doing a lot more travel solo at that time. So yeah, that kind of kept me coming back.
I can imagine so. And the second part of that question was, now that it has changed so dramatically from 2007 to 2022, where you have all these new things such as the Hoi An Bridge we referenced, Phu Quoc has taken off in that time. We have Moi Nay, which is very popular. Ho Chi Minh, completely different ball game. Can imagine Hanoi is similar. How has your relationship with Vietnam changed from perhaps 2007 to now, based on all of the changes it's gone through? Has it been impacted in any way?
That's a really big question, Connor, because there's kind of life up to COVID, and then there's life after COVID. I mean, my relationship changed with Vietnam probably most predominantly in 2016. And one of the trips that I did back, I did a long stay. I stayed for a month, and I actually moved into a situation where I got offered a job. And I was offered the job to sell a major hotel group, a Vietnamese hotel group that was literally building from the ground up at the time in Hoi An. And they had on their drawing board to build 5 hotels, which they did. And because I had a flight center background, I'd kept all my contacts in flight center over the years. I mean, it's a pretty cliquey industry, the tourism industry. And working with some, pretty influential people, I was able to win the flight center account. So I kind of went from a travel tourist, just explorer, to a little bit more of a business relationship. So I'm not answering your question directly, but I guess I started to view Vietnam through different eyes, from a more tourism and tourist aspect. And that changed the way I looked at the landscape and what was happening in travel, and how the travel boom was about to take off. And just to give you some relationship to the travel boom. So in 2019, the Vietnamese government reports that they will receive something like 18.3 million tourists into Vietnam. And, the rate from 2007 to 2018 was dramatic. It was just exponential. There was buses on buses. They couldn't even fit the buses into places like Hoi An. They had to park them outside the town and ferry people in on like golf carts, etc., and cyclos. And then COVID hit, and it dropped to 3.8 over 2 years. And that was only due to business development and, of course, diplomats and government officials, etc., that made up that small amount of 3.8. Now we're at 2022. The doors are open as of March. So, it's a new landscape again, because not everything survived COVID. And I don't know. I'm back in September. I have to see it with my own eyes now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to talk more later in the conversation about what that means for tourism going forward in Vietnam 2022. But can I get your reaction to COVID? Were you based in Australia when COVID hit back early 2020? And how was your reaction to the developments?
Well, it was funny. I was actually in Vietnam up until the 19th of March, 2020. So I was over there on a trip. I was doing 2 to 3 trips per year up until that point, between 2016 and 2020. And I was due to leave on the 29th to come back to Australia. But my husband was saying to me, look, I think this thing called this COVID thing, I think it's going to take over the world, and they're going to name it as a pandemic. And the country's going to shut you out if you don't come home. Now, by that stage in 2020, I had been working, and I still do work, for what they call a Vietnam inbound tour operator. So that's a Vietnam destination management company. And my boss in Hanoi was saying, Kerry, look, I know things are kind of a little bit nervous here in Vietnam at the moment, but I think they're going to shut the doors, and I think Australia's going to shut you out as well. So we need to get you home. So I literally got on, one of the last few flights to get back to Australia, and I've got to admit to you, Conor, I was in denial. I was like, I don't believe this. I just cannot believe that this is happening. And, while it was the 19th of March, on the way to the airport, to Da Nang Airport, my driver got pulled over, and I got tested for a temperature test, etc. And I'd heard some gossip that there was people and backpackers, etc., that they'd kind of put in some hotel or some kind of Vietnam establishment, and were kind of ferrying food into them because they were worried that they were transmitting. I mean, there was real feeling that the tourists had brought the disease to Vietnam. So if you weren't wearing a mask walking around in those days, and thankfully between the hotel group and my boss, I was taken very good care of. But, there was a lot of nervousness in the air, so to speak. It was quite scary.
I can imagine. And from what happened then, you flew back to Australia, you were able to get through that, I guess, ordeal in the initial stages. What happened next is obviously tourism was hugely affected, your industry, due to COVID. So what happened for you, I guess, from a personal and professional sense, once you were back in, say, April 2020?
Yeah, so I got back, and of course, Australia did close the doors, and Vietnam at that stage, really for most of 2020, was in a good place. It was, the numbers were very low. The country was really dealing with it very, very strictly, but certainly life pretty much as normal. Expats were being asked to go home, to leave the country if there was any confusion as far as their visa status was concerned. But for the most part, Vietnam was okay. It was just that the rest of the world wasn't. So my boss, I have a very good relationship with my boss, and I just said, well, I don't think I'm going to be selling any tours into Vietnam from Australia in the foreseeable future. What do you want me to do? And she said, well, because you've got a marketing background, would you be, open to move your headspace into marketing so we can keep our brand and our messaging and our communications up during this time. We wait and see what happens. So that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years.
Right, I see. And what does that actually entail? Say for somebody who isn't familiar with marketing or can't quite understand how you would be able to do that when you don't have access to Vietnam unless in special circumstances. What sort of things have your job entailed since 2020 up until this point that we speak currently?
Okay, so the main part of my job is to keep our communications with our current database. So that would involve creating newsletters, updating COVID reports so that we keep our customers informed so that they are aware of the status and just how the country was performing in that way, so that, you know, if there was any groups or if there was any plans or anything already in vogue, that they knew how to advise their clients. Because, you know, it didn't kind of go snap, crackle, pop all in one day. It kind of crept up on everybody, and every country was in varying stages of COVID until probably, you know, late 2020, when it was apparent that it was all over the world and it was pretty serious. And until we got the vaccination status and things like that. So it was really important for me to keep communication. So that was the first thing. So communicating with our customers, creating newsletters, creating blogs, and working with operators still in the country dealing with it. In addition to that, we have a social media platform. So making sure our branding and our messaging there was still strong, because, you know, there was a lot of companies over the ensuing months that have just kind of dropped off the earth. You know, they weren't able to survive for varying different reasons. And it's been really tragic, really tragic. And, you know, while we have been able to maintain a very small business, as we support Vietnam Airlines, the company I work for, you know, it was important that we stayed on the radar, so to speak. So social media was a very big part of that. And then, of course, in addition to that, there was just creating the right messaging. So on our website, making sure that the information on there was up to date. And if we were looking at developing new plans and new tours, etc., we got into working what those new tours would look like and designing those. So we did a lot in the technological side in the background, because for the first time we actually had time to work on the business and on the business model. So we were able to improve that as well. So, you know, very broad spectrum, but it kept my hand in. And it was also the time, it was actually May 11th, 2020, that I decided a good way for me to keep my personal profile in the Vietnam space would be to create a podcast. And by doing the podcast, I would be able to keep connected and have a really good reason to stay connected if I was to connect with previous travelers, operators, and guides, etc., in the country, so that people could keep Vietnam on their radar, I guess, so to speak, for the future when we were over the COVID situation.
Absolutely. And talk to me a bit more about the podcast, please, Kerry. What about Vietnam? How has it developed since you began on May the 11th, 2020?
Well, it's really developed some legs, to be honest. It's gone much further than I thought it would. I must admit, in the beginning, there was a huge learning curve for me, in the sense of learning some new technology. I knew that I was going to be up against the situation where 99% of my guests were going to be remote. So I was going to be talking to somebody who had traveled to Vietnam, that either was still in Vietnam or had been to Vietnam and had since gone back to their country. I mean, I've spoken to people who, you know, have done river cruises up the Mekong, but it's, you know, I was talking to them in Portugal because they just got home. I was talking to one guy who took some fabulous photos of Ha Giang and had a fabulous trip and just spoke about that area so eloquently. but he was back in the US as well. So the challenge around technology was there, but I really wanted to create a very polished product, and I wanted it to be informative. And I'm sure you're up against this as well, is that you want it to be interesting, but you don't want it too serious, and you want it to be fun and just relatable, so people can kind of relate to it, I guess, and could say, oh yeah, I could see myself doing that. Or no, maybe not going for, to a snake restaurant for lunch with a bottle of champagne. No, I don't think that's me. That sort of thing, if you know what I mean.
No, I do. Yeah, making it relatable for the listeners and also connecting with the guest. Does it change from guest to guest? For example, you might get a couple who've gone up along the Mekong, then you'll have someone from Hanoi, someone from Da Nang. Does it differ from people across the country in different areas? Or would you say there's a typical profile of someone you would interview?
No, there's no typical, absolutely no typical. And that's, I think I'm hoping one of the joys of the program is that each program is unique. Each show is different, and people are not going to know what to expect. I haven't kind of purposely done that. I've wanted to surprise and bring new aspects of Vietnam to the show, as in, I didn't want to just talk about destinations. They can go to a guidebook and they can go to Google for that. Type in Sapa, type in Hanoi. It'll give you all the stats, the population, and, Ho Chi Minh. So I wanted to add in experiences. I wanted to talk about what have people done that was interesting, or what should people look out for, or, just maybe the must do. Is it kid friendly? Is it good for solo people? What about that river cruise? Did that feel safe? I really wanted to kind of mix up the destination, the guest, and the experience all in the one show.
Absolutely. No, I definitely understand the variety aspect. I tried the exact same with Comeback because I don't want the listener coming to the episode thinking that they know who's going to be on or they can tell what's going to come up. I'd rather the mystery aspect and an element of surprise. However, do you see any patterns emerging with your guests? As in, do people say similar things alongside the concept of Vietnam and what to experience if you're in a certain place? Are there any patterns that you spot, or is it quite difficult to gauge with such a variety?
Good question, Connor. That's a really good question. I might be accused of a pattern that I see developing, in the sense that most people have got good things to say about Vietnam. I mean, there's a few that have had a few grimaces about things, and I certainly want to keep it real. I don't want people to go, oh, like it was fantastic, when it really wasn't. If it was okay, or they were a bit disappointed because there was a lot of rubbish, and there was a lot of that sort of feeling. But it's different because my guests vary from age, from their relationship to Vietnam. Some might be guides, some might be previous travelers, some might work for a wellness company, some might be a massage therapist, some might run cooking schools. Some might decide to live there because they went to visit and found that they loved the place. I mean, a recent guest of mine is talking about art in Vietnam. I mean, when you go to a gallery, do you really know what you're looking at when you're looking at some of the art in that gallery? What is some of the symbolism, aspects like that? So I can't really say there's a trend, but if there is a certain appetite for the typical guest, it's probably ones that have got, positive things or uplifting or, good things to say about Vietnam.
For sure. And this might bring me to ask about your personal experience, Kerry. Your personal experience of Vietnam, what have been some highlights for you in terms of living and working here?
Look, I've had so many lovely experiences. As I said, I've been traveling back and forth 2 or 3 times a year. I do long stays each time. So I'm there probably 2 to 3 months a year. So I'm almost like the part-time expat. And I get accused of that in places and they go, oh, you're back. But they probably think I just live down the road, but I haven't seen them for a couple of months. But I loved a place called Barbie Lake. I don't know. Have you been?
I haven't been there, no.
Well, that was a small trip I did in 2017, and it's such a beautiful place. It's almost like this. It's a challenge to get there. It's about a 5-hour trip from Hanoi, but the Barbie Lake area is just so special. It's got caves where there's probably only you and 4 people there. The lake itself and the area is so untouched. It's just hard to believe that time has happened and it somehow missed that place. So Barbie Lake is probably one of my most beautiful, serene, tranquil experiences. I mean, I've had a fabulous time in Hoi An and watching Hoi An grow. It's certainly developed over time and become richer with experiences. I'd say Barbie Lake is probably one of my best so far, but a lot still to go.
For sure. And going towards the comeback theme and almost the opposite of that question, living abroad, especially in Vietnam, has so many positive aspects to it, but it also brings its challenges. What have been some of the most difficult parts for you about living in Vietnam for the period that you have?
Well, remembering that I only travel on a tourist visa, so I'm essentially not living in Vietnam, be it that I go for a month each time. I might go in March, I might go again in July, August, and then I might come back in October. So I haven't kind of had that living experience because I'm mostly staying in hotels, resorts, etc., homestays. So I'm not actually living and having to do the living experience because, as I'm sure you would have a lot to share on that, Conor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been 3 years now and there is definitely its trials and tribulations, but overall it's good. But it can be quite tricky, perhaps, making the sacrifices of living away from home and being involved in a community where there's still that different mindset on so many different areas, where I'll speak to my Vietnamese friends and they won't ever criticize their government, whilst back in the UK, it's very common to criticize the government. And just little things like that, to be honest with you, can make it slightly tricky at times, but overall it's a worthwhile experience.
Yeah, but big. I'm sure life-changing for you on a lot of levels.
Yeah, no, I can definitely say that, especially coming here as I turned 22 and being 25 in August. Spending your early 20s in Saigon, it's an interesting one, to be honest. I probably would recommend, but there's definitely things to look out for. I find a lot of the time it can be, and I don't mean to hijack the podcast here, it can be opportunity versus escapism, where Saigon can offer so many different things, for good or for bad. The opportunity or escapism comes up as a huge theme for me when I associate with the hundreds and hundreds of people I've met here as the 2 primary reasons for people to move and then make their avenues throughout here.
Yeah, but you're right about the mindset too. You can't expect them to think like a Westerner, to relate to any of those things. So, just because of their history, because of the way they act, it would be an eternal learning experience. I know, even working with Vietnamese, and even though they can speak English, they can't really comprehend what is the meaning between the lines, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no.
And they can't do those kinds of interpretations. And when I might say, oh, they don't like this accommodation, and they'll go, oh, why? Well, does it really matter? They don't like it.
Yeah.
So we have to find them a new hotel because they have said this, and this, and oh, but we think it's really nice. I know, but we have to change it. So
Yeah.
Let's find, one of the 100 that are out there
Yeah, no, you
to
do have to,
choose.
open your mind a bit more and recognize that it might frustrate you, that example that, but why, that type of thinking does work in Australia or England, but this is Vietnam and we've chosen to be here, so you have to play by their rules.
Yes.
Absolutely. What I'm thinking here, Kerry, is Tourism 2022. I think it was last month or 2 months ago now. We're recording this early May. In March 2022, when borders started to open, and I've seen hints of tourism. I've not really been to, say, the Boy Viens of this world so much so far, but I know tourism has restarted. What do you see? This might be tricky to answer. The future of tourism in Vietnam from 2022 onwards.
Look, I think there's an appetite definitely for recovery. I think the recovery will still be a little bit slow or cautious. I'm already talking to travel agents again, and there's definitely enthusiasm. However, no one's putting their money on the booking, if you can understand. So
Yeah, of
people
course.
are definitely expressing interest, and I think it's a little bit about they're wanting to kind of see the transition manifest itself. So they're wanting to see the traffic, they're wanting to see the increase in airline frequency and flights. They're wanting to judge just how the accommodation is looking, what is still open, So once again, marketing is a very important part. And even what I'm doing with the podcast, what about Vietnam? Is kind of a statement and a question, as in, people used to say, oh, we go to Bali, we go to here, we go to the Philippines, we go to Thailand. And I used to say, what about Vietnam? So, when I say that now, I say, what about Vietnam? As in, the borders have opened again. And I think Vietnam is very keen to bring back a healthy level of tourism. I do think it went a little bit nutso, like leading up to the pandemic. I think there is an interest in getting the country to a sustainable level of tourism, better managed. I mean, we may not be seeing in Vietnam as many Chinese tourists as we have. We may not even be seeing any Russians or many Russians. I'm talking to somebody just next week about Nha Trang, which has been traditionally a very attractive resort area for the Russians. I mean, I don't know. So there's still a lot of questions on the table, and certainly what's happening in Ukraine is affecting all of us. But as far as resuming travel and how travel moves forward, I'm positive. I'm feeling very positive. I'm booked to come back in September. Some of my guests that I've got lined up in the next few weeks are talking about some of the aspects of recovery that is certainly enticing and attractive, as in, restaurants that have come back on board in the area of fine dining. I'm keen to see this new gallery that has opened up in Hue, which Bridget shared with me on a show last week. So even just from my guests, and I'm trying to talk to more that are in Vietnam at the moment, and I'm even going to be talking to you, Conor, about Condao, remember? I feel the positivity in the air, and I feel even back here in Australia, talking to travel agents, there is very much an eagerness for them to start selling Vietnam and open the doors back, because everybody that comes to Vietnam, 9 times out of 10 has a great experience.
Right, I see. And that's the prediction for going forwards in 2022 and beyond. Do you think there can be some downsides to this? For example, if you are Russian and there won't be as many, or Chinese or any other, I guess, cons to increased tourism. It's great to get people back in Vietnam, of course, to visit and to see, but can there be some downsides?
Downsides as into too many or not enough or particular areas or...
Yeah, my thoughts were initially too many because now it's been 2 years. I would assume, and you might be able to tell me more, that people would be dying to get into Vietnam and that would cause a boom. But is that the case, or how would you see it?
Look, I think there's some people that think that. I'm probably not one of them. I don't think it'll be fast and furious. I think it will be more. It will be slower and deliberate. I think. I think the whole world has changed just totally philosophically about travel. There's much more thought. We were getting on and off planes, let's face it, pre-COVID, like on and off a bus. It was, the whole world was almost visa free. Now we've got much more complications about travel. There's certain age groups that are probably a little bit more fragile than they used to be. So your baby boomers, etc., that are a bit more nervous. I mean, I know people that were avid travelers beforehand, before COVID, and now are much more hesitant. And I think it's going to take a little while for those to settle down. I mean, the diehards like me and others, I think will definitely be out there again and very keen, but it has got more complicated. So I think that complication has to get a little bit more rationalized. And I think there's some talk in Vietnam at the moment that by June, some of the levels of entry to the country will be even taken further away. So it'll be so much easier to enter the country. So I think the easier it gets, the more settled that will happen. Now, to your question about, is that going to be bad for Vietnam, as in we're going to get too many tourists? Look, I hope that's going to get better managed. I think there was over tourism definitely leading up to the pandemic. And, I hear that there's been some great areas of improvement as far as cleaning up the country, and areas that have flourished, forests and rivers, etc., that have, kind of been brought back to life because, there hasn't been the treading of the tourist. So I hope there's going to be some more sustainability on that level, so that there can be a positive imprint. And there's certainly levels within Vietnam tourism and the government talking about that. And I've even been speaking to some of those working groups and people that are steering those committees. So, I'm hoping there's going to be more thought all round, but I don't want people to miss out on Vietnam. I do think it's a country to discover, but it's a country also that people kind of tend to hit the main 3 or 4 spots and then they go. And I think there's a lot more to Vietnam than those 3 main destinations. So, if we could maybe encourage in our trip planning and our tour advice and, talking about Vietnam, we might kind of broaden the brush so that, people come back several times and not just to the same places.
Absolutely. No, I love the fact that you've mentioned that about the broadness and the vast amount of areas in Vietnam that can be explored instead of just, say, Da Nang, Ho Chi Minh, Hanoi, for example. There are so many. And it brings me to, I suppose, a hidden gems kind of question. Are there any places that perhaps aren't as popular for tourists that you would expect or that deserve more recognition in Vietnam? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, like it's funny, there definitely is those main destinations that have really had extreme exposure on your Instagrams, and your Google sites are just full of images of those places. And yet there's some, and I know you and I just talked briefly about Con Dao, like it is a hidden gem. There's a place called Dalat, and not many people think to go to Dalat. And if you went to Dalat and you saw everlasting flowers, like flowers that actually never die. I've seen strawberries the size of apples almost there. You go into the hills and you'd swear to God you were in, some European country. The waterfalls, there's no gating around them. You can put your hands out and you can actually touch the water. It's that accessible, and it's that beautiful, and it's that untouched. But they're not destinations that have been big in promotion and social media. I mean, places like Ha Giang, places like Sapa, places like I'm thinking of Ninbin. Now, a lot of people talk about Halong Bay, but then they don't talk about Lanha Bay, and they don't talk about Ninbin as much, where I think Ninbin is probably even more interesting than Halong Bay. Gosh, I could go on and on. I mean, Phong Nha. Now, Phong Nha caves came up when they discovered the largest cave on the planet, believe it or not, in 2009.
Oh, wow.
And, that's only 2009, Connor. That's kind of in our lifetime, And I got to talk on the podcast, would you believe, with one of the guys, British guy, who was actually part of the group that stumbled, like they literally stumbled on this cave. It's like about 7 kilometers. You can fit Big Ben in the cave. So it takes 4 days to go from one end to the other, and it's starting to capture great interest, but it's for your real intrepid adventure caving kind of person. But it's opened the world up to, there's more to Vietnam than just, as you say, the bustling city of Saigon, Hanoi, Hoi An, and possibly Da Nang. I mean, people never think about Vietnam, about kite flying. I mean, kite flying, the kite flying capital is, I think in Southeast Asia, one of them is Munay. Nobody told me about that. Nobody told me about, there was deserts in Munay. Hello. I mean, it's just a world discovery too. And that's what I love about it, is that I haven't been back to Vietnam once and done everything the same. I managed to go somewhere else. I mean, Quy Nhon is a place that has only just come up on the roadmap. There's now a new ferry system to go to Lison Island. Now, I've been meaning to go to that island for, I think, the last 5 years, but it was such an awkward trip, and you had to get this bus, and it only ran on certain times, and then you had to kind of connect up with the ferry, and if it missed the ferry, then you didn't get it. So now there's this straight ferry straight to Lison Island. Guess where I'll also be going, and I'll be able to go to that from Hoi An. So, like, my podcast is kind of a discovery tool for me as well. So I'm learning about new destinations as the new destinations are coming on, and I'm trying to expose them and give them, the benefit of insights, so that, people that have been there or people that are in the process of developing, I'm talking to them. So my listeners kind of get the real insights. I don't have to wait for a Lonely Planet guide to come out each year and, hope to God it's got the most up-to-date information. And of course you can Google everything, but it's not the same as someone telling you, look, we went there, look, don't do that. Forget going at that time of the year because it just rains all the time and you miss seeing the best parts. And, so it's like going to Ireland, isn't it? And going to Moher, and sometimes you see nothing, and then the fog lifts, and other times and it looks fabulous. So it's all the benefit of insight.
Absolutely. And
the cliffs of Moher, I meant. Yeah.
Okay. And one thing we mentioned at the beginning was perhaps leading up to the pandemic, over tourism, and how it then can be managed from now on. Now tourism is a thing again. How can tourism be managed, in your view, Kerry, to be the most effective possible for Vietnam and avoid, say, over tourism or under tourism or any complications? What do you think are the most effective ways for Vietnam to tackle tourism going forward now?
Jeepers, I need a job on the Vietnam Tourism Board after this, because I'm sure it's coming up on their agenda similarly. How do they do that? Look, one of the ways where they were starting to stem the traffic, I guess, of over tourism was in the freedom of giving out licenses for homestays. I think at one stage in Hoi An alone, and probably I've had more to do with the Quang Nam area than anywhere else, so I can speak more proficiently about that area. So they were I think they stopped at 318 licenses to have a homestay. And what they learnt from stopping that was that they had to put some limit on how many hotels and how many homestays, how many beds were they going to allow in a vicinity. Now, if you look at the township of Hoi An, the old town itself, it's only about 2.5 kilometres in size. And then if you build all of these, accommodations and you pour, of course you're going to get into trouble, as in the city is not going to be able to cope with that traffic. You're going to have a trodden city where you're starting to damage it and you're going to ruin that UNESCO World Heritage Site. So I think there's a look at accommodation, and, there will be some input, or there's going to be some checking on just how many they're going to allow, how many beds, and how many tourists they're going to allow. So there's going to be also, how many flights they're going to let into certain areas. So, the frequency of flights and the size, I think that's going to be another element, because that's where your numbers come: accommodation and people into airports. So we have to sleep them somewhere. So that's probably where it starts. And then they'll look at, eateries and things like that to manage that. I mean, over tourism is definitely a problem to the environment. I mean, there's enough studies around the world to verify that. But how each government manages it around the world is very different, is very unique. And even within Vietnam, because there's so many provinces, each province tends to manage their own tourism their own way, under their own guidance or jurisdiction as they see fit. So there's not, anything particularly consistent, but there is working parties and groups, and thankfully I've got some good ears into those. And, I am hearing some good noise out of those, that they are going to be looking at licensing and just how they can manage, the footsteps around Vietnam.
Absolutely. And I suppose coming towards the end of the conversation, Kerry, this might be tricky again, and I feel like we have alluded to it at points, but what would your ideal scenario be for Vietnam, say 2022, 3 and 4? What ideally would you like to see happen?
In respect to
the tourism reopening and what that would mean for the country?
Look, I think they're not even going to have to work very hard at a slow intake of tourism. I think that's just going to happen organically. I think them making it easy for people to enter the country, but keeping the visa level under some jurisdiction. I mean, you'll notice that they pretty much put it back to what it was prior to COVID. So for those 80 countries, you can come for 15 days. But for the other countries, your maximum stay under a visa application is 30 days. So, during COVID, there was a lot of expats that had to leave the country because they weren't there kind of essentially legally. And, there was a lot of workers that were working there and taking Vietnamese jobs. So they've also had to leave. So in some ways, COVID's been a bit of a godsend for Vietnam to clean Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam's got, 96 plus million population. So it's got a thriving domestic tourism aspect to it. And it's also a thriving country. So even its own domestic travel is on a boom, and there are more Vietnamese traveling. Even just this holiday, I think you even said recently, I heard you talk to somebody and saying, you want to go where everyone else isn't going because it's going to be that crowded. Yeah. So I'm hoping that, and there is a push on trying to broaden the scope of travel experiences for people and for operators to take a very sustainable approach. So in other words, instead of before them having a group of 30 or 35 people, their maximum might be 20. so that they will take smaller groups. I'd like to see that happen in the future, so that the people in the groups are getting a better experience and we're not bringing too many in at the same time. I think I'd like to see a growth in the development of the hospitality industry in the training area. And I think that's also going to happen of its own accord, because it's by demand. I mean, I'm hearing in Ho Chi Minh City, there's a lot of hotels that just can't get manpower back because, you know, a lot of people lost their jobs. They went home to their families and villages to kind of wait it out. And so I think there's going to have to be an investment, and certain hotel groups, I think, are going to step up to that because they'll see the opportunity. So we've got some good things in quality coming back. I'd like to see that. I would like to see the growth in social enterprise as well, because I really like, wherever I can, see the growth in the minority groups and the support of those minority groups in a very, healthy, wholesome and supportive way. So it gives back to those communities. I'd like to see more of that. But once again, that won't be throngs of people. That'll be a group of 6. That'll be a maximum of 12, that kind of thing. We won't, I don't think there's going to be the big bus loads. And, a lot of those bus loads were coming from China. So I'm kind of on a watch, wait and see whether or not, we will get the Chinese back in, as they were the number one tourist group to Vietnam. So, yeah, I mean, I could sit in that round table, Conor, with those working party groups in tourism any day of the week with all my wish list. But I think, there's a lot of players in the field. There's a lot of money that's being kind of discussed as far as development is concerned. So it's a little bit, wait and see.
Right, I see. And a new tradition I have on this podcast, Kerry, is asking the guest a question, which is, has there been a question that I've not asked you that you would have liked me to?
Well, I thought we were going to talk a little bit more about podcasting. And I thought we were going to kind of share some of the aspects of, what do you know about Vietnam travel from a podcast?
Right, I see. And we did allude to that briefly, where we spoke about people from different avenues doing different topics based on their experiences. But what have you found out specifically about Vietnam from your podcast then, Kerry? What about Vietnam? What have you discovered?
Well, obviously, I've discovered a lot of new places and new experiences. But what I've also discovered is more about how people are consuming information. Like, is everybody totally dependent on the one source? Does everybody just Google the place? Or, would you think to go to a podcast that was about travel, specifically about Vietnam? Because there's not many travel podcasts, and there's not many just about Vietnam. In fact, I think I'm one of the rare few. There is Southeast Asian travel podcasts, and there's very mixed travel podcasts across lots of destinations, but there's not many just about Vietnam. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I only saw, I'd class 7 Million Bikes a Vietnam podcast, because that's what it's called. There's your own, there's Vietcetera. Yeah, I can't think of any more.
But they're not travel specific.
No, that's true. That is true, yeah.
They are broad-based, and they are, certainly talking about stories about people related, but they are not about travel experiences. And that I found kind of, amazing. I mean, I'm glad I've got that niche, but, is that because people, don't relate to a podcast to be informative about travel, or they want to see things, or I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? I'd be keen to know.
Yeah, I would think it's because people would probably rather Google or rather look at Instagram. This is just what's coming to me on the top of my head, rather than listening to a podcast about it. Unless I was, say, friends, or I knew the podcast host, for example, or I was aware of guests who'd been on. So, I would probably say that's the reason why people aren't quite going to podcasts for this information, or they probably look for YouTube. I mean, you can type in visiting Vietnam on YouTube and there'll be thousands of videos with lots and lots of hits compared to podcasts. That's my current opinion.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting one because, you're right. If you type in Google to, visiting Vietnam or travel through Vietnam, there's blogs, there's vlogs, there's, YouTubes, but they're all kind of, just someone either selling a tour or there is, somebody's just done a holiday video of their trip to Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh or the Mekong Delta or something like that. So it's 2 minutes and bang. So there's not much in this space. So I wondered whether it was good to kind of inform your listeners that that's why I've kind of expanded the podcast situation so that I also include a transcript. So if you'd prefer to read about a place, there's a full transcript, which is in a PDF format so that you can print it off. So you can read about the place or the experience, you can highlight it, you can do whatever. And also I do small like teaser elements, so audiograms. So the person, I'll grab something and I go, God, that was really interesting. And I'll just grab a 2-minute snippet. I do a full episode on YouTube, and I'm also moving to curate special kind of experiences, etc., which will have visual aspects on the site. So hopefully I'm going to fill the visual gap, because I think the visual gap's about the only gap I can see in this channel, for want of a better word. What do you think?
And where can we find out more about what you do, Kerry? How can we access your work?
Well, obviously you can go to the website, whataboutvietnam.com. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn under my name, Kerry Newsome, and also the What About Vietnam podcast page on the LinkedIn site. You can also check me out on Instagram and Facebook.
Excellent.
So I would love feedback from people because, my audience is growing dramatically. I've got nearly 20,000 listeners already just in 2 years. I do publish fortnightly, but I'm really keen to get people to give me their feedback. What do they want to know? What do they want me to get someone to talk about because they're interested in going to Vietnam and they want to have a particular experience?
Absolutely. Have you any final thoughts, Kerry, before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say fantastic what you're doing, Conor. Really love your episodes. I really wish you well. And maybe we can catch up when I'm there in September.
Absolutely. I'd love nothing more. Definitely explore some of Ho Chi Minh, see what it has to offer, and see how you find coming back after a long break. Kerry, I've really enjoyed. Keep up the good work, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Conor.
Thank you for listening. Check out the episode notes for more information.
What about Vietnam?
Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review, and stay tuned for more fun adventures in Vietnam.
What about Vietnam?